She shouldn't even be here. The words landed harder than the clatter of silverware. For one suspended moment, the entire dining room seemed to forget how to breathe. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath golden chandelier light. A pianist continued playing somewhere near the marble staircase, but the music suddenly felt distant, drowned beneath the weight of a single sentence. Heads turned. Conversations faded. Even the waitstaff slowed their steps. At the center of the silence sat an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her hands trembling slightly as she stared down at the bowl of soup in front of her. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore. Most people in the room saw only the wheelchair, only the gray hair, only the slow movements. They never saw the woman herself. And that was exactly why Nia Brooks noticed her. Nia had been working a double shift at Riverside Manor, one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago. Her feet ached. Her shoulders felt heavy. She still had another 4 hours before she could go home. But when she glanced across the room and saw Eleanor sitting alone, something inside her refused to look away. The older woman's caregiver had stepped outside to take a phone call. Her soup had gone cold. Her napkin had slipped onto the floor. Around her, wealthy guests laughed over steaks that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. Nobody noticed. Nobody except Nia. She quietly crossed the room carrying a fresh bowl of soup. She picked up the napkin. She adjusted the blanket draped across Eleanor's knees. Then she knelt beside her chair. "Would you like me to help?" she asked softly. Eleanor looked up. For a second, confusion clouded her eyes. Then something gentler appeared. A small nod. A grateful smile. Nia smiled back. She carefully lifted a spoonful of warm soup and waited patiently. No rush. No embarrassment. No pity. Just dignity. The kind that cannot be bought. The kind that has to be given. Several nearby guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. One man rolled his eyes. Another whispered that people like Eleanor belonged in a care facility, not a luxury restaurant. Nia ignored every word. She continued feeding the elderly. Woman one spoonful at a time. Between bites, she spoke to her the way she would speak to a favorite grandmother. About the weather. About the flowers near the entrance. About a little boy she had seen feeding pigeons in the park that morning. And slowly, something remarkable happened. Eleanor began to laugh. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet laugh. Fragile and beautiful. The kind that seemed almost forgotten. Across the room, several diners stared. One woman lowered her phone. Another guest stopped mid-conversation. Because they were witnessing something rare. Not wealth. Not power. Humanity. What nobody in that restaurant knew was that the woman in the wheelchair was the mother of one of the most powerful CEOs in America. And what nobody noticed was the black SUV that had just pulled up outside beneath the glowing entrance lights. A tall man stepped out. Expensive suit. Controlled expression. The posture of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms worth billions of dollars. Ethan Whitmore had arrived to pick up his mother. But before he walked through the doors, his eyes drifted through the restaurant windows. Then he stopped. Completely stopped. Because inside, beneath the warm lights and curious stares, a young black waitress was kneeling beside his mother. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Whitmore was smiling. For several seconds, Ethan Whitmore remained motionless outside the restaurant window. The city moved around him. Traffic lights changed. Cars rolled past. A cold breeze swept through the downtown streets. But none of it registered. His attention stayed fixed on the scene inside. He had spent years searching for ways to bring comfort back into his mother's life. He had hired specialists from Boston, Chicago, and Los Angeles. He had paid for treatments that cost more than most homes. He had renovated an entire wing of her estate to accommodate every possible need. Yet despite all of it, the woman he loved most in the world seemed to drift farther away each year. The smiles became rarer. The conversations became shorter. Some days she barely acknowledged anyone around her, including him. And now, through a pane of glass, he was watching a waitress accomplish something that money never had. Eleanor laughed again. The sound was soft, almost delicate, but Ethan recognized it instantly. It was the same laugh he remembered from childhood. The laugh that filled their kitchen when she helped him bake cookies. The laugh that echoed across soccer fields when he scored his first goal. The laugh he thought he had lost forever. Inside the restaurant, Nia continued speaking gently while helping Eleanor finish her meal. She never looked at her watch. Never glanced around impatiently. She behaved as though there was nowhere else she needed to be. No other table demanding attention. No pressure. No performance. Just kindness. Real kindness. The kind people rarely notice because it expects nothing in return. Ethan finally stepped through the front doors. The warm scent of fresh bread and roasted herbs drifted through the air. A hostess greeted him immediately, recognizing one of the most recognizable business leaders in the country. But he barely heard her. His eyes remained on his mother. As he approached, Eleanor noticed him and smiled. It was not a large smile. It was not dramatic. Yet it carried enough warmth to stop him in his tracks. For years, visits had often begun with confusion or silence. Tonight was different. Tonight she seemed lighter, present, alive. Nia stood as Ethan reached the table. She straightened her uniform and offered a polite smile. "Good evening, sir," she said. "Your mother was wonderful company." Ethan looked from Nia to Eleanor and back again. For a moment, he struggled to find words. That almost never happened. Boardrooms feared his questions. Investors studied every sentence he spoke. Yet standing beside this table, language felt strangely inadequate. "Thank you," he finally said. Nia nodded politely. "She made my shift better too." Before Ethan could respond, another server called her name from across the dining room. Several tables needed assistance. Orders were waiting. Responsibilities were piling up. Nia excused herself and disappeared into the flow of the restaurant as naturally as she had entered the evening. Ethan watched her walk away. Something about her stayed with him, not because she had done something extraordinary in the eyes of the world, but because she had done something extraordinary in the eyes of his mother. As he wheeled Eleanor toward the exit, she gently touched his arm. Her voice was quiet, weakened by years of struggle, but perfectly clear. "She is special," Eleanor whispered. Ethan glanced back toward the dining room. Nia was helping another elderly guest adjust a chair. She had no idea she was being watched. No idea that the brief act of compassion she considered ordinary had just changed something inside one of the most powerful men in America. The next morning, Ethan Whitmore arrived at headquarters before sunrise, but for the first time in years, quarterly reports were not the first thing on his mind. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline as the city slowly woke beneath a blanket of silver clouds. Normally, Ethan thrived on routines. Numbers, deadlines, acquisitions, decisions worth millions of dollars before breakfast. Yet throughout every meeting, every presentation, every conversation, his thoughts drifted back to a small table inside Riverside Manor and the waitress who had somehow reached a place that countless specialists never could. By noon, he found himself staring out his office window instead of reviewing contracts. The memory of his mother's smile kept returning. Clear, genuine, unforced. It felt almost impossible. His assistant entered carrying a folder. "The board meeting begins in 20 minutes. Ethan nodded but did not move. Then he asked a question nobody expected. "Have someone gather information on an employee at Riverside Manor. Her name is Nia Brooks." The request surprised even him. He was not looking for secrets. He was looking for answers. What made her different? Why had Eleanor responded to her so naturally? Hours later, a simple report arrived on his desk. No scandals. No extraordinary accomplishments. No hidden fortune. No viral fame. Just a life filled with responsibility. Nia Brooks, age 27. Southside Chicago. Worked 2 jobs. No criminal record. No complaints. Excellent employment reviews. Former community college student who had paused. Her education several years earlier. Ethan continued reading. His eyes stopped on one detail. For nearly 6 years, Nia had served as the primary caregiver for her grandmother after a severe illness left the elderly woman dependent on others. 6 years. While friends built careers and traveled, she spent evenings helping someone else eat meals, attend appointments, and maintain dignity. Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. Suddenly certain pieces began falling into place. Compassion like that rarely appeared overnight. It was built one difficult day at a time. Meanwhile, across the city, Nia was beginning another shift. The previous evening had already faded into memory. She had no reason to think about billionaires or corporate empires. Bills still needed paying. Rent was still due in 2 weeks. The restaurant still needed tables cleared and guests greeted with a smile. Life moved forward. As she tied her apron in the employee locker room, another server approached. "Your friend coming back tonight?" Nia looked confused. "What friend?" "The sweet lady in the wheelchair." Nia smiled immediately. I hope so. The answer came from her heart before she even thought about it. Because she genuinely enjoyed Eleanor's company. The stories, the smiles, the little moments when confusion disappeared and warmth returned. Later that evening, Riverside Manor filled once again with the sounds of conversation and soft piano music. Nia balanced trays, delivered meals, and moved through the dining room with practiced grace. Then the front doors opened. Eleanor entered first, wrapped in a light blue sweater. Behind her walked Ethan. Several guests recognized him instantly, but Nia only noticed Eleanor. Her face brightened. Eleanor's face brightened too, and that tiny exchange did not escape Ethan's attention. For the second night in a row, he watched something remarkable happen. The moment Nia approached the table, his mother's eyes seemed to come alive. As though somewhere beneath the fog of difficult years, a familiar light was beginning to find its way home. Something changed over the next few weeks. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It happened the way sunrise happens, so gradually that most people never notice until the darkness is already gone. 3 evenings each week, Eleanor and Ethan returned to Riverside Manor. They always requested the same table near the tall windows overlooking the river. And almost every time, Nia found a few spare moments to stop by. Sometimes it was only 5 minutes, sometimes 10. Yet those minutes became the highlight of Eleanor's day. The restaurant staff began noticing the pattern. So did the regular guests. Eleanor spoke more, smiled more. Even her posture seemed different. There was a spark returning to her that nobody could fully explain. One rainy Thursday evening, Ethan arrived earlier than usual. He paused near the dining room entrance and watched from a distance. Nia was showing Eleanor old photographs from a local history book she had borrowed from the public library. They were pictures of Chicago from decades earlier. Vintage streetcars, neighborhood bakeries, baseball games played long before either of them sat in that restaurant. Eleanor pointed at one photograph and laughed softly. Then she began telling a story. Her words came slowly, but they came. Ethan froze. For years, conversations with his mother had often lasted only a few sentences before confusion interrupted them. Now she was sharing memories. Complete memories. The sight tightened something inside his chest. He quietly sat down and listened. As the evening continued, Ethan found himself learning things about Nia he never expected. She never talked about herself unless someone asked directly. Even then, her answers were brief, humble, honest. Eventually, Eleanor asked why she always seemed to know exactly what to say to older people. Nia hesitated. Then she smiled. My grandmother taught me almost everything I know. The answer sounded simple, but there was more behind it. Ethan could hear it immediately. Eleanor reached for her hand. Tell me about her. For a moment, Nia stared toward the rain tapping gently against the restaurant windows. The dining room lights reflected across the glass like tiny stars. She raised me, Nia said quietly. When I was growing up, she worked 2 jobs and still found time to help with homework every night. Later, when she became sick, it was my turn to help her. Ethan listened carefully. Nia explained how her grandmother gradually lost independence over several years, how ordinary tasks became difficult, how doctor appointments filled entire afternoons, how some people stopped visiting because they did not know what to say. Yet she never complained. Not once. She always told me something, Nia continued. She said every person wants the same thing when they get older. To feel seen. Silence settled over the table. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. The kind that stays with people. Ethan lowered his eyes. Because suddenly he wondered whether, despite all his resources and good intentions, he had spent years focusing on treatments, schedules, and care plans while forgetting something simpler. Something more human. Across the table, Eleanor squeezed Nia's hand gently and smiled. And for the first time, Ethan began to understand why his mother seemed different whenever this young woman was around. Nia was not healing her with medicine. She was giving her something far rarer. She was making her feel seen. The more Ethan observed, the more questions began to follow him home. Weeks passed, yet the pattern never changed. Nia treated every guest with respect, but there was something different about the way she cared for Eleanor. Not because Eleanor was connected to wealth, not because of influence. In fact, Nia rarely seemed interested in who anyone was outside the restaurant. She cared about how they felt while they were inside it. One evening, Ethan arrived nearly 30 minutes early and chose a seat where he could quietly watch the dining room before his mother arrived. The restaurant glowed beneath warm amber lighting. Glasses sparkled. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Around him sat attorneys, executives, and visitors celebrating promotions or anniversaries. Yet his attention remained fixed on a single person moving gracefully between tables. He noticed how Nia remembered names, how she asked about grandchildren, medical appointments, and family vacations. She remembered details most people forgot. More importantly, she remembered people. Then something happened that caught Ethan completely off guard. An elderly man sitting alone near the back of the restaurant appeared confused while looking at the menu. Several servers passed by, assuming he needed more time. Nia immediately recognized something different. She walked over, crouched slightly beside the table, and spoke gently. Within seconds, the tension in the man's face disappeared. She helped him choose a meal, wrote down a reminder for him on a napkin, and even called a taxi company before his dinner was finished so he would not have to wait outside in the cold. There was no audience, no recognition, no reward. She simply did it because she noticed. Ethan found himself staring, because he had spent most of his life around people who responded to incentives, promotions, bonuses, contracts, recognition. Yet Nia seemed motivated by something entirely different. Later that evening, after Eleanor had finished dessert, she unexpectedly became quiet. Her eyes moved around the room uncertainly. Ethan immediately recognized the signs. Some nights were harder than others. Some moments arrived without warning. The confusion would settle in like a passing fog. Normally, he would guide her through it himself. But before he could speak, Nia appeared beside the table. She did not rush. She did not panic. She simply sat beside Eleanor and pointed toward the river outside the window. "Look at the lights tonight," she said softly. "They remind me of stars floating on water." Eleanor followed her gaze. A few moments later, her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. The uncertainty gradually faded. Ethan watched in amazement. Not because Nia possessed some special training. She did not. She possessed something rarer. Patience. Real patience. The kind that cannot be taught in seminars or purchased with money. As they prepared to leave that night, Eleanor surprised both of them. She reached into her purse and carefully removed a small folded photograph. The edges were worn with age. With trembling hands, she offered it to Nia. It showed a much younger Eleanor standing beside a smiling little boy on his first day of school. Ethan immediately recognized himself. Nia looked at the photograph and smiled warmly. Then Eleanor spoke words that stopped the world for a moment. "Thank you for helping my son find his mother again." Ethan felt his throat tighten, because deep down, he knew she was right. The photograph stayed with Ethan long after they left the restaurant that night. Back at the estate, while most of the city slept beneath a blanket of midnight lights, he sat alone in his study, turning the image over in his hands. The picture showed a younger version of himself standing beside his mother, smiling without worry, without pressure, without the weight of responsibility that would eventually settle on his shoulders. The frame of the photograph was simple. The memory inside it was priceless. Across the room, financial reports worth billions of dollars sat untouched on his desk. For perhaps the first time in decades, none of them felt important. He kept hearing Eleanor's words. "Thank you for helping my son find his mother again." The next morning arrived with clear skies and bright sunlight, reflecting off the glass towers of downtown Chicago. Yet even inside the fast-moving rhythm of corporate life, Ethan could not shake the feeling that he had overlooked something essential. For years he had measured success through growth, efficiency, and results. Every challenge had a strategy. Every problem had a solution. Every goal had a timeline. But human connection did not follow those rules. It could not be managed like a company. It could not be purchased like an asset. Somehow, Nia understood that instinctively. A few days later, Ethan found himself returning to Riverside Manor alone. No assistants. No security detail. No announcements. Just a man looking for answers. The restaurant was quieter than usual during the late afternoon hours. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting golden patterns across polished wood floors. Nia was arranging silverware when she noticed him entering. Surprise flickered across her face. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. Ethan smiled. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan asked the question that had been following him for weeks. "Why do you do it?" Nia tilted her head slightly. "Do what? Care so much?" The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No rehearsed speech. Because someone cared that much for me. Ethan listened quietly. Nia explained how her grandmother had spent years sacrificing for others. How she taught her that dignity was not something people earned through status. It belonged to everyone. The wealthy, the struggling, the healthy, the sick, the young, the old. Everyone. My grandmother used to say that people remember how you make them feel long after they forget what you say, Nia said. Ethan lowered his eyes. The truth of those words settled deeply. Because his mother had forgotten countless names, dates, and conversations. Yet somehow she remembered how Nia made her feel. Seen, valued, safe. As the afternoon light softened around them, Ethan noticed something else. Nia never spoke about herself with regret. She mentioned postponing school, working long hours, caring for family. Yet there was no bitterness in her voice. Only gratitude. That realization affected him more than he expected. Many people spent their lives chasing opportunities. Nia spent hers creating opportunities for others. And as Ethan walked back toward the restaurant entrance that evening, one thought became impossible to ignore. The young woman who believed she was simply serving meals had already changed far more lives than she realized. 2 weeks later, an unexpected moment arrived that would stay with Ethan for the rest of his life. It began on an ordinary evening. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation. Candlelight flickered across polished tables. Outside, autumn winds swept fallen leaves along the sidewalks beside the river. Inside, Eleanor seemed unusually cheerful. She had spent most of dinner sharing scattered memories from decades earlier. Some stories arrived clearly. Others wandered before finding their destination. Yet Ethan treasured every word. Across from them, Nia listened with genuine interest, smiling at details many people would have politely ignored. Then, without warning, something changed. Eleanor's expression shifted. Her eyes moved. Uncertainly across the room, the familiar confusion returned. Ethan immediately recognized it. The story stopped. The smile faded. For several long seconds, Eleanor seemed lost somewhere between memory and reality. Ethan gently reached for her hand. "Mom, it is okay. I am here." But her eyes continued searching. The uncertainty deepened. Nearby conversations faded into the background as Ethan felt the familiar ache he knew too well. There had been many moments like this over the years. Moments when he felt powerless despite everything he had accomplished. Moments when he would have traded every dollar he owned for one clear conversation with his mother. Then Nia quietly stepped closer. She did not interrupt. She simply knelt beside Eleanor's chair. "Do you remember the river?" she asked softly. Eleanor blinked. Nia pointed toward the window where city lights danced across the dark water. "You told me once that your husband proposed near a river." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Eleanor's eyes focused. Slowly, gradually, like sunlight breaking through morning fog. Her gaze settled on Nia. A small smile appeared. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "It was spring." Nia smiled back. "You said the flowers were everywhere." Eleanor nodded. "Yellow flowers." The tension in Ethan's chest eased slightly. Then something remarkable happened. Eleanor reached out and took Nia's hand with surprising certainty. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "My angel." The phrase hung in the air. Simple, honest, unfiltered. Several nearby guests glanced toward the table. They did not understand the significance of what had just happened. But Ethan did. Because during difficult moments, his mother often struggled to recognize even familiar faces. Yet somehow, through all the confusion, she recognized the feeling Nia gave her. Safety, comfort, trust. Ethan lowered his eyes, fighting emotions he rarely allowed himself to show. Boardrooms had seen him negotiate billion-dollar agreements without hesitation. Competitors feared his confidence. Investors admired his composure. Yet none of those skills mattered in this moment. Because this was not about business. This was about love. About family. About a son witnessing someone help his mother feel less alone. When Ethan finally looked up, he noticed that Nia seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. She squeezed Eleanor's hand gently and redirected the conversation back to old family stories. No expectation. No desire for praise. Just quiet kindness once again. And as Ethan watched the two women laugh together beneath the warm restaurant lights, a decision began forming inside him. A decision that would soon change far more than one life. The following Monday, Nia arrived at Riverside Manor expecting an ordinary shift. The morning had been busy. Her second job had ended later than usual the night before. She was tired, but like always, she pushed through it with a smile. The restaurant manager approached her shortly after lunch service began. "Someone is here asking for you." Nia looked surprised. Few people ever came looking for her at work. She followed him toward one of the private dining rooms near the back of the building. When she opened the door, she stopped. Ethan Whitmore stood beside the window overlooking the river. Eleanor sat nearby, smiling warmly. Sunlight poured through the glass, filling the room with a soft golden glow. "Did I do something wrong?" Nia asked nervously. Ethan smiled for the first time. Quite the opposite. He motioned toward an empty chair. Nia sat down slowly, unsure what was happening. For a moment, Ethan simply looked at her. Not as a waitress, not as an employee, but as someone whose actions had changed his family. "There is something I want you to know," he said. "For years, I believed that solving problems meant writing bigger checks and finding better experts. Then you showed me something I had forgotten." Nia remained silent. Ethan continued. "You reminded my mother that she matters. You reminded me that she is still the same woman who raised me. You gave our family something priceless." Nia looked down, uncomfortable with praise. "I was only trying to be kind." Eleanor laughed softly. "Exactly." The room grew quiet. Then Ethan placed a folder on the table and slid it toward her. Confusion crossed Nia's face. She opened it carefully. Inside were documents, scholarship papers, educational records, program outlines. Her eyes moved across the pages. Then she looked up. "I do not understand." Ethan leaned forward. "Years ago, you paused your education to care for your grandmother. I think the world needs more people with your heart and your understanding. I would like to fund the rest of your education." Nia stared at him, speechless. "There is more," Ethan added. "My foundation is launching a new initiative focused on dignity and quality of life for older adults. I want you to help design it." Nia blinked rapidly. Surely she had misunderstood. "Me?" Ethan nodded. "Not because of your resume. Not because of your connections. Because you understand something that many professionals never learn. You see people." Tears filled Nia's eyes. She thought about long shifts, unpaid bills, dreams placed on hold, years spent caring for someone she loved without expecting recognition. She had never imagined any of it would lead to this moment. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "The world needs more of what you have." Nia struggled to speak. Finally, she managed a whisper. "I do not know what to say." Ethan smiled gently. "Then do what you have always done. Keep helping people feel seen." And as sunlight reflected across the river outside, Nia realized that the door opening before her was far bigger than a new job, a scholarship, or a financial opportunity. It was a chance to transform the kindness she had shown one person into hope for thousands more. 2 years later, the morning sun rose over Chicago beneath a sky so clear it seemed to promise new beginnings. Hundreds of people gathered outside a newly completed building overlooking a quiet park near the river. Families arrived pushing wheelchairs. Volunteers welcomed guests at the entrance. Nurses, caregivers, community leaders, and local residents filled the courtyard with conversation and anticipation. Above the main entrance, elegant silver letters reflected the sunlight. Eleanor Care Network. What began with a simple act of kindness inside a restaurant had grown into something far larger than anyone imagined. The organization now supported older adults across multiple cities. It provided companionship programs, caregiver resources, transportation assistance, educational services, and community outreach initiatives designed around one simple belief. Every person deserves dignity. Inside the building, framed photographs lined the walls. Smiling families, volunteers, grandparents reunited with loved ones. Lives touched by a mission built not around profit, but around humanity. Standing near the stage, Nia Brooks adjusted the sleeve of her navy blazer and took a slow breath. The waitress who once worked double shifts to pay bills was now leading programs that reached thousands of people every year. She had completed her education. She had built teams. She had helped create systems that allowed elderly individuals to feel valued instead of forgotten. Yet despite everything that had changed, one thing remained exactly the same. She still greeted every person with the same warmth she once showed at a small table inside Riverside Manor. Across the room, Ethan Whitmore stood beside his mother. Eleanor's hair was whiter now. Her movements remained slow. Some days were still difficult, yet there was peace in her eyes that had not existed for many years. She looked around at the crowd and smiled. Ethan followed her gaze. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of lives transformed. Not because someone spent money, because someone cared enough to notice people others overlooked. The ceremony began. Speakers shared stories. Families described receiving support when they felt alone. Caregivers spoke about finally having resources and guidance. One woman described how weekly visits from volunteers had helped her father regain confidence after years of isolation. Another family explained how transportation assistance allowed their grandmother to reconnect with her community. Story after story filled the room. Each one traced back to a single idea. People matter. Finally, Nia stepped onto the stage. The audience applauded. She looked out at the crowd and paused. For a moment, memories rushed back. Long shifts, quiet sacrifices, her grandmother's advice. The first time she met Eleanor. The night everything began. Then, she smiled. This organization was built on a lesson I learned many years ago, she said. The greatest gift you can give someone is not money. It is making them feel seen. Silence settled across the room as her words found their place. Near the front row, Ethan felt emotion rise in his chest once again, because he knew better than anyone how true those words were. After the ceremony ended, guests filled the halls. Conversations echoed through the building. Laughter drifted from room to room. Ethan eventually found himself standing beside a large portrait of Eleanor near the entrance. The photograph captured her smiling exactly as she had on those evenings at Riverside Manor. He looked at the image for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. My mother taught me how to succeed. He glanced across the room where Nia was speaking with families and volunteers. But Nia taught me how to see people. And in that moment, surrounded by lives forever changed, he understood a truth that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Wealth can build buildings. Power can open doors. But kindness is what changes the world.